Have you ever made a choice so desperate it changed your entire life? One cold night at a glittering Chicago hotel, Evelyn Hart, a quiet English teacher with borrowed confidence and a bruised heart, did something no one expected. When she saw her ex walking toward her with that same cruel smile, she panicked and kissed the first stranger she saw. It was supposed to be a lie, a shield, a way to save her pride. But what if that stranger wasn't just anyone? What if he was a man hiding a secret of his own? A man who could rewrite the meaning of love, trust, and home. This is a story about chance, about how a single impulsive act can unravel two carefully built lives, and how sometimes heartbreak doesn't end you. It points you to where you truly belong. What would you do if the person you kissed to escape your past turned out to be the one meant to build your future? Stay with us through this journey of second chances, quiet courage, and the kind of love that grows from honesty. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And let's begin. She kissed a stranger and found her home. The ballroom of the Silvermont Hotel shimmered like a lake of light. Crystal chandeliers glowed from above. The sound of polite laughter drifted through the air, sharp, tinkling, hollow. Evelyn Hart stood near the edge of the crowd, clutching a tray of champagne glasses that trembled ever so slightly in her hands. The air smelled faintly of roses and expensive perfume. She shifted her weight in her black heels, wishing she could disappear into the polished marble floor. This wasn't her world. It never had been. The Silvermont was hosting Ashbury College's annual alumni fundraiser, a glittering event meant to honor donors, not volunteers. Evelyn was one of the volunteers. Her scholarship agreement required community participation, so here she was, 32 years old, an English teacher with student loans and a borrowed black dress that fit almost right. She tried to smile, moving carefully through the room, offering glasses of champagne to people who didn't really see her. They saw the uniform, not the person wearing it. Everywhere she looked, there was gold. Gold cufflinks, gold bracelets, gold smiles. The laughter sounded practiced, the compliments rehearsed. Each conversation carried the rhythm of competition: who donated more, who aged less, who married better. Evelyn inhaled slowly. She'd grown up in a town where people still baked pies for their neighbors, where you could pay for coffee with spare change and a promise. Chicago was different. It glittered and cut. The tray felt heavier the longer she held it. Her arms ached. She placed it down on a side table and flexed her fingers, stealing a moment to breathe. Her reflection stared back from a wall of mirrors. Soft brown hair swept into a simple bun. Pale skin. Tired eyes that tried to look confident. She forced herself to stand tall. Just get through the night, she thought. Smile, serve, leave. But the music slowed, and the room shifted. A hush of attention spread near the grand staircase, subtle but palpable. People turned, eyes drawn to something, or rather, someone. Evelyn followed their gaze and froze. Lucas Gray. Her breath caught. For a moment, she forgot how to stand. He was laughing, that same low, confident laugh that used to melt her. The tuxedo fit him perfectly. His hair was shorter now, styled with a precision that screamed success. And beside him, a woman younger, radiant, wrapped in a silver gown that clung like moonlight. Evelyn's stomach tightened. 2 years. 2 years since he'd walked out of her apartment with his leather bag and those final, polite words that still echoed in her chest. You're good, Evie. But love doesn't build empires. Back then, she'd stood in the doorway, clutching a coffee mug, too stunned to cry. He'd left for a law firm in the city, and within months, there were pictures him at charity galas, sailing trips, champagne smiles. And now he was here, at her alma mater's event. In her world, the one she'd clawed her way into through hard work and late nights grading papers. Her pulse raced. She told herself it didn't matter. She was fine. She had moved on. She had her work, her students, her quiet apartment lined with secondhand books, but her heart didn't listen. It never did where Lucas was concerned. She tried to step back, to disappear behind a column, but it was too late. He'd seen her. That smile? God, that smile? Polished, perfect, cruel in its familiarity. He said something to the woman beside him, who gave Evelyn a curious glance, the kind of glance that assessed and dismissed in the same breath. Then Lucas started walking toward her. Evelyn's breath hitched. She turned sharply, pretending to rearrange the tray of glasses. Her fingers shook. The stems clinked together, delicate, betraying. He was closer now. She could sense his presence before she saw him. That effortless confidence he wore like a tailored suit. The smell of his cologne cedar and smoke carried memories she didn't want. Her chest tightened. The noise of the room seemed to fade. All she could hear was her heartbeat. It was absurd, she told herself. She was an adult, not a teenager. He was just another person. Just another ghost from a past life. Then a voice behind her, Evie. Is that really you? The sound of her old nickname cracked something inside her. She turned slowly. He stood only a few feet away now, champagne glass in hand, that familiar smirk tugging at his lips. Up close, he was even more composed, even more polished than she remembered. He looked like someone who'd never known uncertainty. Her mind flashed back to the nights he'd promised forever, sitting on her old couch, sketching their future on napkins, dreams of a house, a dog, maybe children, dreams that dissolved the moment a wealthier woman called. Evelyn's throat went dry. She managed a faint, polite smile, the kind she used with difficult parents at parent-teacher conferences. Her fingers brushed the edge of the tray again, searching for something solid. Don't let him see you tremble. Don't let him see you small. But her pulse betrayed her. Her breath betrayed her. And when he said, in that perfectly casual tone, "You look different," she heard everything he didn't say. "You look tired. You look older. You look like someone who lost." Heat rushed to her face. She swallowed, forcing herself to answer, but the words tangled in her throat. All she managed was a nod, a quiet, "Lucas." He grinned, slow, confident, indulgent. "You're still volunteering, huh?" She blinked. "It's part of course," he interrupted smoothly, taking a sip of champagne. His tone was effortless cruelty. "Always the helper. That's what I liked about you. You were sweet." Something inside her clenched. Sweet. The word landed like a slap. She could have said 1,000 things, clever things, angry things, but all she did was stand there, silent, the old humiliation curling through her chest. He tilted his head, studying her like a stranger he barely remembered. The music swelled again, soft and low. Her fingers trembled, the tray rattled, and then behind him. Through the blur of gold and light, she saw someone else, a man standing alone near the marble bar. Tall, composed, observing, not performing. His presence was calm, quiet, the opposite of Lucas in every way. And for reasons she couldn't explain, her heart steadied. She drew in a breath, slow, deep. The air tasted of champagne and courage. Lucas was still talking something about his firm, his new house, his fiancée's family. Evelyn barely heard him. Her gaze drifted again to the stranger at the bar. He turned his head slightly, their eyes meeting across the glittering crowd. Gray eyes, unfamiliar, unreadable. But in that fleeting connection, something shifted, a spark of defiance, or maybe fate. And as Lucas took another step closer, ready to deliver another patronizing line, Evelyn's heartbeat whispered one clear thought: do something, anything. The sound of Lucas's voice pressed closer, smooth and poisonous, each word soaked in the arrogance she remembered too well. Evelyn felt her heart hammer against her ribs. Her hands turned cold, her breath shallow. He was smiling, that smug, polished smile that had once charmed her and now only made her stomach twist. He looked her up and down, eyes flicking over her black volunteer dress, her badge, the tray of glasses beside her. "Well," he drawled softly. "I didn't expect to see you here, working the event." Evelyn forced a breath. "It's volunteer work." "Lucas?" He nodded, pretending to be impressed, always the generous one. "That's what I liked about you. Remember then?" Leaning slightly closer. He added in a tone low enough for only her to hear. "Still chasing causes that don't pay?" Huh. Her throat tightened. Heat prickled behind her eyes. There it was, the old dynamic, his condescension, her silence, the invisible power he always carried, like he'd been born to stand above everyone else. Evelyn's pulse raced. She looked down, just long enough to hide the sting. Don't cry. Don't give him that satisfaction. Her mind spiraled between anger and humiliation. The room tilted, lights blurring into a kaleidoscope of gold and shadow. She could hear the jazz band in the distance, the laughter of strangers who didn't care. Her body screamed move, but her feet stayed frozen. She wanted to run anywhere, but her pride held her in place. Then she saw him, the stranger from across the room. He stood alone near the marble bar, half in shadow, half in light. He wasn't laughing, wasn't pretending. There was something grounded about him, something quietly certain in the way he carried himself, as if the noise around him had nothing to do with him. Evelyn's mind flicked through options, every one of them ridiculous, until one impossible idea took hold. If she couldn't disappear, maybe she could rewrite this moment. Before fear could stop her, she took a step forward, then another. Evelyn Lucas's voice followed her. "Where are you?" She didn't answer. Her heels clicked against the marble floor. Steady at first, then faster. Every step pulsed with adrenaline. The stranger turned slightly, catching sight of her approaching. His brow furrowed, just a trace. She didn't slow down. Her pulse roared in her ears, her thoughts tangled. "You're insane? Stop. Don't. Too late." When she reached him, she didn't speak, didn't think. She simply rose on her toes, grabbed the lapel of his suit, and kissed him. The world shattered into silence. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't romantic. It was breathless, trembling, desperate, a shield made of human skin and instinct. Her lips brushed his, clumsy, soft, trembling. The faint scent of his cologne clean, earthy. Something like cedar and rain filled her lungs. For a heartbeat, he went still. Then she felt his breath catch, not in shock, but in quiet understanding. He didn't pull away. The world around them blurred, the chandeliers, the music, the murmured whispers. It was like being inside the eye of a storm, just stillness. Then, slowly, carefully, he lifted his hand and rested it against her arm, not to hold her, not to claim, but to steady her. It was a simple gesture, kind, grounding. Her pulse slowed, breath shaky against his. For that one impossible second, she wasn't a woman being pitied by her ex. She was just safe. Then reality came crashing back. A clink of glass, a gasp somewhere nearby. The music stumbled, then carried on as if nothing had happened. Evelyn stepped back, eyes wide, chest heaving. Her fingers still clutched his suit as if afraid to let go. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to. The stranger blinked once, twice. His expression softened. Are you okay? The calm in his voice was startling. He wasn't angry. He wasn't amused. He just looked at her like he was trying to understand. I think so, she stammered. I just needed... She swallowed hard. A way out. His eyes followed hers, catching sight of Lucas a few yards away, frozen mid-step, confusion etched across his face. The stranger seemed to understand everything in that one glance. He turned back to her and said quietly, "Then let's give them a show." Before she could react, he slid his hand gently to the small of her back, not possessive, but protective, and turned slightly toward the room, his body shielding hers. His calm composure radiated confidence, effortless and natural. Lucas hesitated. The look on his face flickered from disbelief to irritation. Then, with an awkward half-smile to save face, he turned away, muttering something to his date as they drifted toward the exit. The stranger waited until they were gone before lowering his hand. "Better?" he asked softly. Evelyn nodded, still breathless. "You didn't have to do that." He tilted his head, a faint smile in his eyes. "You already did. I just followed your lead." She let out a shaky laugh, half embarrassment, half relief. Her hands trembled as she brushed a strand of hair from her face. "God, I don't even know your name." He extended his hand, calm and steady. "Daniel," he said. "Daniel Mercer?" She blinked. The name felt familiar, though she couldn't place it. But before she could think further, she heard someone whisper from across the room, the faint hiss of gossip, and her heart sank again. "What have I done?" she murmured under her breath. Daniel's voice was gentle. "You handled yourself?" She looked up, startled by his composure. Her cheeks flushed. "I kissed a stranger?" He smiled faintly. "Technically." "I'm no longer a stranger?" Her laugh came out weak but real. For the first time all evening, she didn't feel like she was suffocating. The music swelled again, something slow, soft, forgiving. She stood there, trying to catch her breath, still tasting the faint warmth of that impossible moment. And as she watched Daniel turn toward the bar to order a drink, Evelyn realized the enormity of what had just happened. In a room full of ghosts from her past, she had done the unthinkable, and it had set her life on a completely new course. For a moment, Evelyn couldn't breathe. The noise of the ballroom faded into a distant laughter, music. The clinking of crystal, all muffled by the roar of her heartbeat. She had just kissed a stranger. Her pulse thundered in her ears, hot embarrassment burning through her chest. She stepped back quickly, her fingers still curled around the lapel of his suit before she realized she was holding on. "Oh my God," she breathed, mortified. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. The words tripped over one another, tumbling out in a whisper that sounded small even to her own ears. Daniel Mercer blinked once, twice, as if rebooting from a long silence. His gray eyes, startlingly steady, softened. Then, in a voice so low she almost missed it, he said, "We're fine." 2 words, calm, solid, grounded, and somehow they were enough. He didn't look angry. He didn't look shocked. He looked composed. A faint, genuine smile tugged at his lips, not mockery, not amusement, but something quieter, like understanding. And in that instant, Evelyn felt something shift. The room came back into focus. The music swelled. The laughter returned. And from the corner of her eye, she saw Lucas still standing halfway across the room. His expression, once smug and certain, had curdled into confusion. He froze, watching her. Watching them. Daniel's gaze flickered briefly in Lucas's direction, then back to her. His tone turned conspiratorial, a whisper meant only for her. "Because as far as I'm concerned," he said, his lips curving slightly, "we're fine." The words hung between them light, almost playful, yet carrying an unspoken promise. Evelyn didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Her throat ached with all the things she couldn't say. Lucas lingered for a heartbeat longer, as if trying to make sense of what he was seeing then. With a faint scoff, turned sharply and led his jeweled date toward the exit. It was over. The tension that had wrapped around Evelyn's chest all evening loosened in an instant. She exhaled shakily, her shoulders sagging. "I can't believe I just did that," she whispered. Daniel studied her with quiet curiosity. "That was bold." "I wasn't thinking," she said quickly, her words tumbling out. "I saw him, and I panicked. My ex. I just needed to, I don't even know." Her voice wavered. "You must think I'm insane." Daniel shook his head slowly. "No." A pause. Just cornered. Something in his tone, that low, level calm, disarmed her. He wasn't teasing, he wasn't pitying. He simply understood. She met his eyes properly for the first time. They weren't just gray. They were layered pale at the edges, darker at the center like clouds gathering before rain. He looked both powerful and tired. Like someone who'd been to 1,000 events like this one and found them all meaningless. Evelyn's embarrassment eased, replaced by a fragile gratitude. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not making that worse." Daniel tilted his head, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "I've seen worse. Once, at a book launch, a woman spilled red wine on a senator's lap and pretended it was performance art." The absurd image pulled a startled laugh from her, the first real one of the night. "I don't usually kiss strangers at parties," she murmured, half hiding behind her glass of water. "That's reassuring," he said lightly. I was beginning to wonder if I'd missed a memo. The warmth in his tone made her laugh again, soft, genuine, dissolving the last of her panic. She looked down at her hands, twisting the napkin between her fingers. The reality of what had just happened still felt impossible. When she glanced up again, Daniel was watching her, not in the way Lucas used to, assessing, calculating, but like someone simply listening. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was still peaceful. After a moment, he nodded toward the edge of the ballroom. "There's a coffee bar in the lobby," he said. "Maybe we can give that kiss a less dramatic context." She blinked. "You're serious?" He shrugged slightly. "I figure it's only fair. You saved me from dying of boredom. The least I can do is buy you a cup of coffee." The way he said it, casual, kind. with no hint of pressure, made her chest tighten. When was the last time someone had spoken to her like that? Not condescending, not transactional, just human? Still, she hesitated. The logical part of her brain screamed that this was a bad idea. She'd embarrassed herself enough for one night. She didn't know this man. He could be anyone. But the truth was, she wanted to say yes. After months of routine, of teaching grammar and reading essays in a quiet apartment, something about this strange encounter felt alive, reckless. But real? Evelyn took a small step toward the door, then stopped. "All right," she said softly, surprising herself. "But if you turn out to be a serial killer, I'm haunting you." Daniel's smile deepened slow, warm, deliberate. "Fair deal." They started walking together toward the lobby. The air felt lighter there, cooler, carrying the faint scent of coffee and rain from the revolving doors. Evelyn slipped off her volunteer badge, tucking it into her bag. She felt oddly free, like she'd just stepped out of a story she didn't want to be in anymore. As they reached the cafe counter, Daniel held the door open for her. "Ladies first," he said. "Careful," she replied, arching a brow. "That sounds dangerously old-fashioned." He smiled again. "Some things are worth keeping." They ordered quietly black coffee for him, a latte for her. For a few moments, they said nothing, just sat across from each other at a small table near the window while the rain streaked the glass outside. Evelyn finally exhaled. The adrenaline drained from her body, leaving behind only exhaustion and a strange, unexpected calm. She glanced at Daniel again, his profile sharp under the dim light, the kind of man who carried gravity. Without trying to, there was something familiar about him, something she couldn't quite name. But for now, it didn't matter. All that mattered was the soft hum of rain against the window, the warmth of her coffee in her hands, and the quiet gratitude blooming somewhere deep in her chest. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. And somewhere in that stillness, Evelyn realized this wasn't the end of her humiliation. It was the beginning of something else entirely, something she didn't yet have the courage to name. The rain had softened into a quiet mist by the time they left the Silvermont Hotel. Streetlights shimmered in puddles along the sidewalk, stretching thin gold reflections across the wet pavement. Evelyn walked beside Daniel in silence, clutching her small purse as if it might anchor her to reality. Her mind was still replaying the kiss, not the feel of it, but the absurdity. The fact that she'd done something so wildly out of character. Daniel, to his credit, didn't bring it up. He didn't ask questions. He didn't even glance sideways at her as they walked. He simply matched her pace, his coat collar turned up against the wind. When they reached a narrow street overlooking the river, he stopped in front of a small cafe tucked between two bookstores. Its windows glowed with amber light, fogged at the edges from warmth and conversation. Inside, it was a world apart from the gala no chandeliers, no glittering gowns, just mismatched chairs, the smell of coffee and cinnamon, and a soft murmur of voices. "This okay?" he asked. Evelyn nodded. "Grateful. It's perfect." They chose a corner table by the window. A candle flickered between them, throwing shadows that swayed gently across Daniel's face. The waitress, a young woman with a nose ring and a tired smile, took their order. A latte for Evelyn, black coffee for Daniel, no sugar. For a while, neither of them spoke. Evelyn stared at the rain-tracing lines down the window. Her heartbeat had steadied, but her mind hadn't. She felt exposed, like she'd peeled back something fragile in front of a stranger, and wasn't sure how to cover it again. Daniel broke the silence first. "So," he said softly, "do you often rescue yourself with spontaneous heroics? Or was tonight a first?" The question caught her off guard, and she laughed, really laughed this time. "God, I hope it's the last." He smiled faintly. "I'd call it brave." "Impulsive," she corrected. "Desperate. Ridiculous. Effective," he countered. Evelyn shook her head, hiding her smile behind the rim of her cup. "You're being kind. I'm being honest," he said. "You walked into chaos and rewrote it. That takes something most people don't have." His tone wasn't flattering. It was matter of fact. And somehow, that made it harder to dismiss. Evelyn looked at him. Really looked this time. He had the kind of face that wasn't built for small talk, calm, deliberate, quietly observant. His eyes didn't wander. When he looked at her, it felt like standing under a clear light. "So," he said after a pause, "Evelyn Hart, English teacher." I'm guessing her eyebrows lifted. "That obvious. The way you said ridiculous had grammar teacher energy," he said with a small grin. "Precise pronunciation. Slight guilt after swearing." She chuckled. "You're not wrong. I teach at Northbrook High. Freshmen mostly. Shakespeare, grammar, the usual uphill battles. Do you like it?" The question was simple, but it stopped her. She'd been asked it before, but always in polite conversation, and no one ever really wanted to hear the answer. "Yes," she said slowly. "But it's exhausting. You pour everything you have into young minds that are half listening and half scrolling their phones. You hope something sticks." Daniel nodded, not interrupting. "And yet," she continued, her voice softening, "sometimes it does. You'll get a note at the end of the year. 'Thanks for believing I could write.' And for a second, it feels worth it." Her words surprised her. She hadn't planned to say so much, but Daniel's quiet presence invited honesty. When she trailed off, he asked gently, "If you could do anything else, no limits, what would it be?" She hesitated. The question felt heavier than it should have. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, watching the candle flicker. "I've had this dream since college," she said at last. "A bookstore. Small, cozy, near the water. Not one of those sleek chains with lattes that cost $5 more, like a place people belong to." Daniel's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes brightened. "Go on," he said. "It would have a reading corner," she continued, her words gaining rhythm as the picture unfolded in her mind. "Old wooden shelves, worn couches, coffee that actually tastes like coffee. People could bring their stories, real ones, not just writers, but anyone who wants to be heard." She smiled faintly, embarrassed by her own enthusiasm. "I'd call it the gathering place, because that's what I want it to be, a place for people who don't fit anywhere else." When she stopped, there was a long, unbroken silence. Daniel didn't laugh. He didn't offer polite encouragement. He just looked at her with a kind of intent curiosity that made her pulse quicken. "That's not just a bookstore," he said finally. "That's a sanctuary." The word landed deep. Evelyn blinked, caught off guard by how easily he'd understood it. Most people smiled and said, "That's nice." He called it a sanctuary. She tried to deflect with humor. "It's not much of a business plan." "Maybe not," he said, his voice steady. "But it sounds like something the world needs." Her laugh was small, disbelieving. "You really think so?" He nodded. People spend so much time talking that they forget how to listen. You want to build a place that teaches the opposite? Evelyn looked down, tracing her fingertip along the rim of her mug. You make it sound noble? It's just a dream. Daniel's gaze didn't waver. Dreams are the only things that ever build anything real. The way he said it quiet, almost reverent, sent a strange ache through her chest. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The cafe hummed softly around them, the rain outside whispering against the glass. Evelyn felt an unfamiliar warmth rising inside her. Not attraction exactly, but connection. The kind that scared her more than she wanted to admit. She liked him. She didn't want to. She'd been down this road before, interest that turned into disappointment, kindness that became control. Her heart whispered careful, even as her curiosity leaned closer. You talk like someone who's built things before, she said carefully. What do you do? Daniel Mercer. He smiled faintly, glancing toward the window. Let's just say I invest in stories. It was a strange answer, vague but deliberate. She tilted her head. That's cryptic, only because it's complicated. He said, some stories pay back in profit, some in meaning. Evelyn studied him for a moment, trying to read the man behind the calm. But he didn't give much away. The waitress came by to refill their cups. The warmth of the mug steadied her again. Thank you, she murmured, both to the waitress and maybe to the man sitting across from her. Daniel set his cup down, reached into his jacket, and pulled out a pen. He scribbled something on a napkin, an address, scrawled in neat, confident handwriting. Sliding it across the table, he said quietly, Meet me here tomorrow. 3 Evelyn stared at it. What is this, a place I think you'll like, he said. Consider it a field trip for dreamers. Her fingers brushed the napkin, the ink still slightly wet. She looked up, meeting his gaze. There was no push in his eyes, no expectation. Just an open door. I don't even know you, she said softly. He smiled. Then tomorrow's a good place to start? The candle flickered between them, its flame bending with the draft as if listening. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets washed clean and glistening. Evelyn folded the napkin carefully and slipped it into her purse. She didn't know if she'd go. She didn't know why she wanted to. But as she stepped out of the cafe and into the cool night air, she realized that for the first time in years, the weight in her chest had shifted just a little. And somewhere between the sound of the river and the echo of his voice, a thought lingered quietly in her mind. Maybe some stories begin in the strangest of places. The next afternoon, the sky over Chicago was the color of parchment soft gray, with sunlight pressing gently through like faded ink. The city moved at its usual rhythm, brisk and busy, but Evelyn's steps were slow, uncertain. She clutched the folded napkin in her hand, the one with Daniel's address written in neat, sure strokes. Meet me here 3 p.m. She had told herself not to go. She'd almost listened. But curiosity was a stubborn thing. And so was the quiet pull she felt toward him, that rare sensation of being seen without judgment. The address led her downtown, to a narrow side street lined with ivy-covered brick buildings. The Lantern Bookshop sat tucked between a bakery and a small music store. Its front window was cluttered with books stacked in uneven towers, spines faded, corners curled. A hand-painted sign hung above the door, its gold lettering worn but proud, The Lantern Bookshop Est. 1927. A small bell jingled as she stepped inside. The air smelled of old paper. Dust. and something sweet, maybe vanilla from the candles burning near the counter. The light filtering through the windows was warm and forgiving, touching the worn wooden shelves like an old friend. Evelyn's heart softened instantly. This was the kind of place she had always dreamed of owning, quiet, human, filled with ghosts that told stories instead of haunting. And then she saw him. Daniel stood in an aisle marked Poetry. No suit this time, just a gray sweater, rolled sleeves, and jeans that made him look startlingly normal. A soft smile crossed his face when he noticed her. "You came," he said simply. She held up the napkin. "I had to see if this was real." "Fair," he said, his tone amused. "I figured I'd either be standing here alone or buying you coffee again." Evelyn smiled despite herself. "So this is your plan, lure women to dusty bookshops with caffeine and charm." "Only the ones who kiss me first," he replied dryly. The warmth that rose to her cheeks was immediate and traitorous. "Touché?" He grinned, then turned back to the shelves, running his fingers along the spines of old poetry collections. "You said you love stories? I thought you might like this place." "I don't like it," she said softly. "I love it." They wandered together through the aisles, their steps slow and unhurried. The floorboards creaked underfoot, each sound like a whispered secret between them. Evelyn trailed her fingers along the bindings, her heart easing with every breath. "You can tell a lot about a person by the way they treat books," she said absently. Daniel glanced over. "And what does it say about me that I can't walk past a shelf without straightening it?" "That you're probably very organized," she teased. "Or very lonely." His smile faltered, not hurt, but thoughtful. Maybe a little of both. Something in his tone made her pause. But before she could ask, he reached for a book and handed it to her. "Here," he said. "Favorite line wins." It was a thin collection of poems by Mary Oliver. The cover was soft with age. Evelyn flipped through it, her eyes catching on a verse she knew by heart. "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" She read it aloud, her voice quiet but steady. The words hung in the air between them, gentle and enormous. Daniel exhaled slowly. "That's a hard one to top." He opened the same book, turning a few pages. His voice was lower, rougher. When he read, "I don't want to end up simply having visited this world," their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them, not romance, not yet. Something deeper, recognition. It was the same ache, the same longing to matter in a world that often forgot to listen. For a while, they said nothing, just stood there. Two quiet souls in the middle of a world built for noise. Evelyn smiled first. "You win," she said softly. Daniel shook his head. "No." "I think we both did." The moment loosened into easy laughter. They moved again, browsing in silence that wasn't empty but filled with the soft rhythm of pages turning. Their shared presence, and the simple miracle of feeling understood. Near the back of the shop, a cat slept on a stack of old hardcovers. Evelyn bent down to stroke its fur, and the cat blinked once before going back to sleep. "She's got priorities," Daniel said. "She's living my dream," Evelyn replied, smiling. "Books, naps, no small talk." He laughed. And it was a real laugh, deep, unguarded, like it had been hiding for a while. She realized then that he didn't laugh easily, but when he did, it changed the entire room. They lingered near the counter, flipping through old travel journals and forgotten first editions. Daniel asked questions that weren't small or safe questions about what she read. what she taught, what she believed made a story worth telling. He listened, really listened, and in that listening, Evelyn felt herself open in ways she hadn't in years. The clock above the register ticked softly. The world outside moved on. But inside, time seemed to stretch measured not by minutes, but by the quiet expansion of trust. At one point, Daniel turned to her and said, "You know, this place reminds me of you." Evelyn blinked. Dusty. He smiled. No. Warm. Unpretentious. A little chaotic, but full of meaning. Her heart stuttered. "You've known me for one day." "I pay attention quickly," he said. She didn't know what to do with that. So she looked away, pretending to read the back of a book she couldn't see. The sunlight through the window caught in her hair. Daniel noticed, but said nothing. When they finally stepped outside, the air smelled faintly of rain and coffee from the shop next door. The afternoon had softened into gold, the kind of light that made everything look more forgiving. Evelyn took a deep breath. The city sounds muffled around her. She didn't want to admit it, but she didn't want the day to end either. Daniel seemed to sense it. "I'm glad you came," he said quietly. "So am I," she replied. Then, after a beat, "That's not something I say often." He nodded, thoughtful. "Maybe you should." They stood there for a moment, not awkward, just still. It wasn't attraction that filled the silence. It was something softer, steadier. The fragile beginning of trust. Evelyn met his gaze one last time before they said goodbye. And she realized something she hadn't felt in years, a feeling that settled somewhere deep in her chest. Unfamiliar, but good. With Daniel, she felt safe. And safety, she thought as she walked away from the Lantern bookshop, was rarer than love itself. The afternoon light was beginning to fade when they stepped out of the Lantern bookshop. The golden hue that had softened the city now deepened into amber, the first hints of twilight pressing against the skyline. Evelyn carried a small paper bag of books Daniel had insisted she choose payment for humoring my strange field trip. He'd said with that easy half-smile of his. She was smiling too. A quiet, unguarded smile she didn't recognize on herself. The city felt different, gentler. Somehow, maybe it was the warmth of their laughter still echoing between them, or maybe it was the strange steadiness Daniel carried, the way he made even silence feel safe. They stood by the curb, waiting for the light to change. Daniel was talking about a line from Frost. The best way out is always through when a voice, sharp and familiar, sliced through the air behind them. Well, Evelyn Hart? The sound froze her mid-step. Her fingers tightened around the bag of books. She turned, and there he was, Lucas Gray. Perfectly pressed, perfectly smug. Every inch the man she had tried so hard to forget. He was dressed for success. Of course, navy suit. Tie that probably cost more than her rent. His smile was all teeth. "Didn't expect to see you downtown?" he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "What brings you here shopping?" For used self-help books, Evelyn's throat went dry. "Lucas?" He looked past her, eyes landing on Daniel with the kind of smirk she remembered too well, the one that measured men by their shoes, their watches, their worth. "And who's this?" Lucas asked. "Another charity case from your little teaching world?" Evelyn's breath caught. Daniel stood beside her, still as stone, hands in his pockets. His posture didn't change, but the air around him did settle, like pressure before a storm. "Lucas," she said, her voice low, warning. He ignored her. Come on, Evie, don't be shy. Introduce me to your new project. Something inside her snapped the humiliation, the old echoes of his cruelty, the years she'd spent swallowing her words. But before she could speak, Daniel's voice cut through the space between them. Mr. Gray, he said calmly. Lucas blinked, surprised. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. There was something about the tone measured, deliberate, that carried authority. You're mistaken, Daniel continued. Evelyn isn't anyone's project. Lucas gave a dry laugh. Oh, you're one of those white knight types, huh? How chivalrous. Tell me, do you even know who she is? Daniel's gaze didn't waver. I know she's worth listening to, which already puts her far above most men in this city. The words landed with quiet precision. No theatrics, no heat, just truth. And it cut sharper than any insult could. Lucas's smirk faltered. Excuse me, Daniel took a small step forward. Not aggressive, just enough to make Lucas instinctively step back. You're excused, Daniel said evenly. Now, unless you plan on saying something useful, I suggest you leave. For a second, no one moved. The air was thick with the weight of an unfamiliar dynamic power without volume, strength without cruelty. Evelyn watched in stunned silence. Lucas, who had always dominated every room, every argument, suddenly looked smaller, like a boy who just realized the world didn't bend for him anymore. He blinked, struggling for words, then scoffed weakly. You have no idea who you're talking to? Daniel's voice didn't rise, but it grew colder, polished steel beneath calm water. Neither do you. The pause that followed stretched like the beat before thunder. Then Lucas looked at Evelyn, sneered, and muttered, Good luck with this one. He turned and walked away, his expensive shoes clicking too loudly against the pavement. Evelyn didn't move. Her heart was pounding not from fear this time, but something else entirely. Daniel exhaled softly, the tension leaving his shoulders as though he'd simply closed a door. He turned to her, his expression gentler again. You okay? She nodded slowly. I think so. You don't have to let people like that talk to you that way, he said. Her laugh came out shaky. I know, I just never learned how to stop them. His eyes softened. Then maybe it's time someone reminded them. She stared at him, still reeling from the quiet force he had just unleashed. Daniel Mercer didn't yell. He didn't posture. But the air around him shifted when he spoke, calm authority edged with something powerful and deeply controlled. Evelyn tried to find her voice. That was incredible. He shrugged slightly, as if it were nothing. He was rude. I don't tolerate rude. You didn't even sound angry. I was, he said simply, but anger doesn't always need volume. She blinked, trying to process him. He'd stepped in not to impress, not to dominate, but to restore, to make her feel safe, respected, seen. No one had ever done that for her. Not her father, not her exes, not anyone. And now this man, this quiet stranger with gray eyes and a calm voice, had dismantled years of humiliation with 5 sentences and a look. As they started walking again, the evening wind brushed against her face, cool and alive. She glanced sideways at him, his profile sharp against the city's fading light. I don't know what to say, she murmured. Then don't, he said with a small smile. Some things don't need words. They crossed the street together, their steps falling into rhythm, into. The city lights blinked on one by one, casting reflections across the wet pavement, Evelyn felt something inside her shift again, subtle, but undeniable. The fragile trust she'd been guarding had deepened into something steadier. For the first time, she wasn't just drawn to Daniel's kindness. She was in awe of his strength, and as the wind carried the last of the daylight away, one thought pulsed quietly in her chest. Daniel Mercer isn't just kind, he's formidable. The days that followed unfolded, like a soft melody, simple, unhurried, and unexpectedly sweet. Evelyn and Daniel began to see each other more often, not in the grand, cinematic way people fall in love in movies, but in small, deliberate ways that felt real. A walk by the river after work, a quick dinner at a diner that smelled like old coffee and frying onions, long conversations that drifted from literature to childhood memories, and sometimes into silence that didn't need to be filled. There was a rhythm forming between them, quiet, steady, like a heartbeat. One Saturday morning, Evelyn found herself standing barefoot in Daniel's kitchen, trying to flip pancakes while he brewed coffee. The sunlight spilled through the blinds, painting stripes of gold across the countertop. "These are going to burn," she warned, as a curl of smoke rose from the pan. "They're supposed to," Daniel said, deadpan, pouring the batter for another one. "Oh, please. You can't plan to burn breakfast. Sure, I can." "It's called adding texture," he said with mock seriousness. She laughed, loud and free, and the sound filled the small kitchen. It had been a long time since she'd heard herself laugh like that, unguarded, alive. Daniel turned toward her with that quiet smile of his, the one that said more than words ever could. For a moment, she saw the man beneath the calm exterior, someone who carried both discipline and gentleness, someone who made her feel safe without trying. He passed her a mug of coffee. "You take it with cream, right?" She blinked. "You remembered?" "I listen," he said simply. And he did. In a world where people talked over each other, Daniel listened like it was an art form. When she spoke, he didn't look at his phone, didn't interrupt. He made her feel like every word she said was worth keeping. They ate their slightly burnt pancakes on the balcony, overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered in the late morning sun, and the air smelled faintly of maple syrup and spring. Evelyn leaned on the railing, her hair caught by the breeze. "You know," she said, "this is the first weekend I've spent without grading papers in months. That sounds tragic." "It is," she admitted with a smile. "But this feels like a small rebellion against what routine, expectations, my own tendency to hide." Daniel looked at her for a long moment before replying, "You don't strike me as someone who hides." She laughed softly. "You'd be surprised. He didn't press. He never did." And that, somehow, made her want to tell him more. They spent the afternoon walking along the river, stopping at a small food stand for lemonade. She told him stories about her students, the chaos, the hope, the heartbreak. He listened, occasionally smiling, occasionally lost in thought. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked suddenly. "Miss what?" "Being young enough to believe everything's simple." Daniel's eyes flicked toward the water. "I miss believing that answers always make things better." The way he said it, soft, distant, made her pause. There were moments like this, little cracks in his calm, where she caught glimpses of something heavier beneath the surface. Phone calls he didn't take, texts he ignored. That look in his eyes when the world around them got too quiet. Not loneliness, exactly, but something close to guilt. One evening, they were walking home from the bookstore when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, and for a split second, his face changed sharp, closed off, as if he'd slipped on an invisible mask. "Everything okay?" Evelyn asked gently. He hesitated before answering. "Yeah, just work." But the way he said it, quick practice, didn't sound like truth. Later, when they sat together on her couch, her head resting on his shoulder, he went quiet again. The silence wasn't peaceful this time. It was heavy, thoughtful, distant. Evelyn turned slightly, studying him. "You're somewhere else?" she murmured. He blinked, as if shaking off a thought. "Sorry, bad habit." "What kind? Thinking too much?" he said. "About things I can't fix." It should have been a simple answer, but she heard something underneath it: regret, maybe, or fear. Daniel was a man of few words, but when he spoke, he carried the weight of someone who'd lived through things he didn't talk about. He would change the subject with ease, redirect the conversation back to her. And every time she thought about asking what haunted him, something stopped her. She didn't want to push, not yet. Instead, she tried to focus on the moments that felt easy, the laughter, the walks, the quiet dinners that stretched into hours. One Sunday, she invited him to her apartment for dinner. It was small but cozy, lined with books and the scent of basil from the little plant she'd been keeping alive for months. They cooked together, bumping elbows and teasing each other about who was worse at chopping vegetables. "Admit it," she said, slicing onions with exaggerated precision. "You're afraid of my knife skills." "I'm afraid of your confidence," he said, smirking. "It's dangerous." The comment made her grin, but then his phone buzzed again. He froze. It was subtle, but she noticed. The easy rhythm between them faltered. He silenced the call without looking at the screen and set the phone face down on the counter. "You can take it?" she said gently. "No," he replied quickly. "It can wait." But his eyes, those steady gray eyes, had gone distant again. They ate in relative quiet after that. Evelyn tried to pretend she didn't notice the tension coiling behind his calm exterior, but it sat there between them like an unanswered question. When he helped her clean up, their hands brushed, and she felt the warmth return but faintly now, like sunlight filtered through clouds. They ended the evening on her balcony again, the city alive below them, streetlights flickering like constellations. Evelyn leaned against the railing. "You know, I used to think happiness had to be loud parties, travel, big gestures. But lately," he prompted. "Lately? It feels like maybe it's just this," she said softly. "Two people, quiet, breathing the same air." Daniel smiled, but there was something sad in it. That's the kind of happiness most people don't know how to keep. She studied him in the dim light, her chest tightening. He looked peaceful, but it was the kind of peace people built to hide the wars inside them. The silence stretched, long and fragile. Finally, she asked in a whisper, "What are you running from? Daniel?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. The hum of the city filled the space between them. Then he turned toward her, his expression soft but haunted. "Myself," he said quietly. "Maybe." The words lingered like smoke, faint, bitter-sweet, impossible to grasp. And before she could ask what he meant, he leaned back against the chair, eyes on the skyline, and let the silence swallow the rest. The invitation came on a Tuesday. Daniel had dropped by her classroom after the final bell. Looking a little out of place among the colorful bulletin boards and half-erased chalk notes, he leaned against the doorframe, watching her stack papers. "There's a charity dinner this weekend," he said casually. "It's for literacy programs across Chicago. I'd like you to come with me." Evelyn froze mid-motion. A gala. Just the word made her chest tighten. She'd spent years trying to forget the last one, the glittering ballroom where she'd felt like a ghost in a borrowed dress. She turned toward him slowly. "I'm not sure that's my scene." He smiled, the same patient warmth she'd come to know. "It's just dinner. Nothing more." She wanted to believe that. Wanted to believe it would be different with him. "All right," she said finally, her voice quieter than she intended. Dinner. Saturday night arrived faster than she expected. Her reflection in the mirror didn't look like her a simple navy dress. Soft curls. Makeup that felt like someone else's face. She almost called to cancel, but the knock at her door came first. When she opened it, Daniel stood there in a dark suit, effortlessly composed, but his expression softened when he saw her. "You look—" He hesitated, then said it simply. "Beautiful." Her heart tripped. "You don't look so bad yourself." He offered his arm, and she took it, trying to steady her breathing. The dinner was held at the Astoria Hall, a grand hotel in the heart of downtown. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, reflecting off gold-trimmed walls. Every table glimmered with polished silverware and expensive smiles. Evelyn's pulse quickened the moment they stepped inside. She could feel the weight of the room, the practiced laughter, the eyes that lingered too long, judging without speaking. Daniel's hand brushed hers, grounding her. "You okay?" She nodded, though her voice trembled. "I feel like I've walked into a movie I'm not supposed to be in." "You belong here," he said quietly. "More than most." But the ease in his tone didn't match the tension in his shoulders. As the night unfolded, she began to notice things she hadn't seen before, the way people greeted him. The deference in their voices. The subtle nods from waiters who seemed to know his every preference. A man in a tuxedo approached, beaming. "Daniel? My friend, the Foundation's grateful for your continued support." Daniel smiled politely, shaking his hand. "Always a pleasure." "Robert," Evelyn blinked. "Support Foundation." Robert's eyes flicked toward her. "And who's this lovely lady?" Before she could answer, Daniel said. "A friend." The word landed like a pebble dropped into deep water. Small. But it rippled all the way through her chest. Dinner passed in a blur of speeches, polite applause, and champagne she barely tasted. Daniel navigated every conversation with the ease of someone used to being watched. He was charming, composed, always in control. And that suddenly scared her. When she had met him, he'd seemed human, thoughtful, quiet. But here, surrounded by the elite, he looked like he belonged. She watched as a woman in a sequined gown leaned close to him, laughing at something he said. The woman's hand lingered on his arm just a second too long. Evelyn felt a flicker of something sharp and unwelcome. Not jealousy, disbelief. Had she imagined it all? The simplicity, the gentleness, the truth? When the dinner ended, Daniel walked her toward the exit, his hand steady at her back. They were steps away from the door when the first camera flash exploded like lightning. Then another, and another. "Mr. Mercer, over here." The sound sliced through the night voices calling, cameras clicking. Evelyn flinched, blinded by the chaos. Daniel turned sharply, shielding her with his arm. "That's enough," he said, his voice clipped but calm. but it was too late. The name Mr. Mercer echoed in her mind like a siren. The reporters shouted again, louder this time. Mr. Mercer, who's the woman? Are you seeing someone? Daniel? Over here? One photo. Evelyn felt the world tilt beneath her. Daniel Mercer. The name that was whispered with reverence across publishing circles. The name she'd seen on book jackets and literary foundations. The name that belonged to a man who owned more than she could ever imagine, that Daniel Mercer. The drive home was a blur of silence. Daniel gripped the steering wheel, his jaw tight, eyes fixed on the road. "I can explain," he said finally, his voice low. She didn't look at him. "Can you?" He hesitated. "I was going to tell you. I just wanted to be sure you knew me before you knew that." "That," she repeated, hollow. "Your money, your name." He glanced at her, his expression pleading. "Evelyn, stop." Her voice cracked. "Please, just stop." The rest of the ride passed in silence. When they reached her apartment, she got out without another word. The next morning, the world woke up before she did. Her phone buzzed incessantly on the nightstand. At first, she ignored it. But when she finally opened her eyes, the screen was lit with messages from friends, colleagues, even her principal. And then she saw it, a news notification. Her heart sank as she clicked Chicago Tribune. Sunday edition, reclusive billionaire Daniel Mercer, seen with mystery woman at charity gala. Beneath the headline was a photo, him in his black suit, arm around her, both mid-step. The flash had caught her face in perfect clarity, her expression uncertain, exposed. She stared at the image until her vision blurred. The article went on to describe Daniel Mercer as the enigmatic CEO of Mercer Publishing Group, a man who had inherited a global empire after his parents' death. It mentioned his extensive philanthropy, his elusive reputation, his rumored billions. And then, the woman accompanying him has yet to be identified. Evelyn's stomach turned. Mystery woman. That's what she was now, a headline, a curiosity, a story for strangers to whisper about. The phone rang again. This time, she answered. Evelyn. It was her friend Claire, voice sharp with disbelief. "Is it true you're dating Daniel Mercer, the Daniel Mercer?" Evelyn couldn't speak. She ended the call and let the phone fall to the floor. She sat there in silence, surrounded by the echoes of laughter and warmth that now felt like a lie. Every word, every quiet smile, every soft touch, all of it rewrote itself in her mind, colored by the revelation that he had been playing a part. She pressed her palms to her face, her body shaking with a mix of grief and rage. "You said you were running from yourself," she thought bitterly. "Turns out, I never even knew who you were." When the tears came, they weren't delicate. They were raw, ugly, human, the kind that came from the shattering of something you didn't even realize had become sacred. And somewhere across the city, Daniel Mercer, billionaire, mystery, man she thought she knew, sat in silence, watching the same headline, his own reflection fractured in the glass. The knock came just after sunset, loud, insistent, impossible to ignore. Evelyn sat on her couch, the newspaper still open on the coffee table. Daniel's name blazing across the front page. The photo stared back at her like an accusation him composed, her caught mid-blink, fragile and out of place. When the knocking came again, she knew it was him. She didn't move at first. She wanted to let him stand there, wanted him to feel what silence felt like, but her body betrayed her. She rose, crossed the floor, and opened the door. Daniel stood there in the hallway, not the polished, confident man from the gala, but someone disheveled, wrecked. His tie was gone, his shirt half untucked. His face looked like he hadn't slept. "Evelyn," he said softly, almost a plea. She crossed her arms, her voice a whisper edged with steel. "You shouldn't be here. I had to see you." "Why? So you can explain how you lied to me in person instead of over the phone?" His expression faltered. "I didn't lie." She laughed, sharp and bitter. "You didn't lie. You're Daniel Mercer. That Daniel Mercer. You let me talk about my little dream of owning a bookshop while her voice broke. You own half the publishing houses in the country. I didn't tell you because I wanted you to know me, not my name." His tone was desperate but quiet, each word deliberate. "For once, I wanted to be just a man, not a brand, not a headline." Evelyn stepped back, shaking her head. "You don't get to rewrite this as some noble search for authenticity." He took a step forward. "It wasn't like that." "Then tell me, what was it like?" she snapped. "Was it fun playing poor? Pretending you were one of us? Did it make you feel real?" He flinched as if she'd hit him. "That's not fair." "Fair," she echoed. "Nothing about this was fair, Daniel. You built this thing between us on a lie." "I didn't build it," he said, voice rising for the first time. "It just happened, and I swear, it was real. Every word, every moment." She stared at him, tears stinging her eyes. "You don't get to decide what was real for me?" The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere in the city, fading into the night. Daniel's voice softened again. "Evelyn, I wanted to tell you. I almost did. 12 times. But every time I tried, I saw how peaceful you looked, how free. And he swallowed. I didn't want to ruin that." "You mean you didn't want to risk it?" she said quietly. "You were protecting yourself, not me." His breath caught. "That's not true." "Yes, it is." Her voice was trembling now, but her words were clear, cutting. "You didn't trust me to know you and still stay? That's what this is really about." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There it was, the truth she'd been circling all along. Finally said out loud. "You talk about wanting to be seen," she continued, "but the second someone could see you for who you really are, you hid. You talk about being alone, but you built your own walls, and now you're standing here wondering why I can't climb them for you." Daniel's jaw tightened, but the anger in his face was gone. What replaced it was worse guilt, deep and quiet and heavy. He ran a hand through his hair, his voice breaking. "You're right." Evelyn blinked. She wasn't expecting that. "I didn't trust you," he said, his words almost a whisper. "Not because of you, but because of me. Because I've lived too long surrounded by people who wanted something: my name, my money, my influence. I didn't think anyone could see past it. And when you did..." He looked up, his eyes raw. "I panicked. I didn't know how to let you in without losing control." Her throat tightened. "Then you never really gave me a chance." He took another step forward, slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. "Evelyn, I'm sorry. I would do anything to take it back." She turned away, blinking back tears. "You can't take it back. That's the problem." "I love you," he said, the words cracking open something fragile between them. She froze, then shook her head. "Don't say that." "It's true. Maybe it is," she whispered. But love built on half-truths isn't love. Daniel, it's a performance, and I'm done being part of someone else's act. The words seemed to knock the breath out of him. He stood there for a long moment, his hands clenched at his sides, eyes fixed on her like a man trying to memorize something he knows he's about to lose. Finally, she looked up at him, tears streaking her face but her voice steady. "You need to go." He hesitated. "Evelyn, please," she said, softer now but no less certain. "I need to remember who I was before you." The finality in her tone left no room for argument. Daniel's shoulders slumped. He nodded once slow, broken. Then, with a quiet exhale that sounded almost like surrender, he turned and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him, and the silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Evelyn pressed her back to the door, her breath shaky, her heart aching with the kind of pain that only comes when you realize someone didn't mean to hurt you, but did anyway. The city outside buzzed with life, indifferent. Inside, she stood in the stillness, replaying every word, every look, every quiet lie she hadn't known to question, and as tears fell onto the newspaper still lying open on her table, Daniel Mercer's name blurred into nothing but ink. The days that followed blurred into weeks, then months. Silence filled the space between them, vast and unrelenting. Evelyn didn't block Daniel's number. She didn't need to. After that night, he seemed to understand that some walls weren't meant to be breached, not yet. So he stayed quiet, and she learned to breathe again. In the mornings, Evelyn buried herself in her classroom chalk dust on her fingers. The faint hum of the overhead lights, the sound of children reading aloud in hesitant, stumbling voices. She threw herself into the work after-school tutoring, library hours, weekend literacy drives. It became her anchor. The classroom was small, with paint peeling from the corners and windows that whistled when it rained. But it was hers. She found peace in the rhythm of it, in the way one of her students, a shy boy named Marcus, beamed the first time he read an entire page without help. "You did it?" she said, smiling. He shrugged, pretending it was no big deal. It wasn't that hard, but she saw the pride in his eyes, the kind that came not from being told he was special, but from realizing he was capable. That was what she loved about teaching. It wasn't about fixing people. It was about reminding them of what they already had. And in some quiet, ironic way, it was what she was trying to do for herself, too. Meanwhile, Daniel Mercer lived in a world that looked the same but felt utterly foreign. His office high above the city, glass and steel and silence had always been his refuge. Now it was a cage. The phone calls, the meetings, the constant deference they grated against him. He had built his life around control, but now all he felt was the emptiness of it. He tried to reach her, at first. A letter handwritten, pages of apology, words he had never been brave enough to say in person. It came back unopened. A bouquet of lilies, her favorite, returned to the office with a polite note. "Please stop." He didn't send anything after that. Instead, he began to listen, really listen to the world he had spent so long hovering above. When his assistant mentioned layoffs at one of the company's printing plants, he visited in person, something he hadn't done in years. The smell of ink and paper hit him like a memory, grounding and real. He watched the workers, men and women with calloused hands and tired eyes, moving with precision through rows of machines. No one looked up when he passed. He wasn't Daniel, the man she'd kissed. He was Mr. Mercer, the name stamped on their paychecks. And for the first time, that realization didn't feel like pride. It felt like loss. That night, he walked home instead of taking the car. Chicago felt different from the ground, rougher, louder, alive. He passed a food truck parked outside a school, where volunteers were handing out books and meals to kids. He stopped to watch. A young woman with a ponytail was kneeling beside a little girl, helping her pick out a storybook. The way she spoke, the way she smiled, it reminded him of Evelyn so much that his chest ached. He didn't know those people, but he felt something stir envy, maybe, or longing, the simple dignity of doing something that mattered. He went home that night to an empty penthouse and realized how quiet wealth could be. The kind of quiet that echoed Evelyn, meanwhile, was rediscovering the joy of ordinary days. She took long walks through the park after work, sometimes stopping at a small bakery run by an older couple who knew her name and always slipped her an extra cookie. She bought secondhand books, filled her apartment with plants, learned how to fix a leaky faucet by watching a YouTube video. Her life was modest, but it was hers, and the more she leaned into it, the stronger she felt. Still, sometimes, when she walked past the river or made coffee in the morning, his face would flicker in her mind, the softness in his eyes when he listened, the sadness in his smile when he said he was running from himself. She would shake the thought away. He was a different world, one she had stepped into and barely survived. Now she had her own. Across the city, Daniel's transformation was slower, less visible, but no less real. He started spending time at the company's community outreach branch, not as a figurehead, but as a volunteer. No one recognized him there, and he didn't correct them when they didn't. He packed boxes, read to kids, cleaned shelves in a dusty neighborhood library. For the first time in years, he was surrounded by people who didn't care about his name. And strangely, that anonymity felt like freedom. Still, when he went home, the loneliness came back sharp and familiar. He would pour himself a drink, sit by the window overlooking the city, and think of her, the way she looked when she laughed, the quiet steadiness she carried, like a compass he'd lost sight of. One crisp Saturday morning, as he flipped through the Chicago Tribune, a small headline caught his eye on the local section's last page: local teacher hosts charity book fair to support literacy programs. There was a photo of Evelyn, standing beside a table piled with donated books, surrounded by children. Her smile was genuine, unguarded, radiant. For a moment, Daniel forgot to breathe. She looked whole, not fragile, not heartbroken, just herself. He traced her face on the grainy newsprint with his thumb, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. For the first time since she'd left, he didn't feel anger or regret, only an aching admiration. He had once wanted to build her a world, but it seemed she'd built her own. And it was beautiful. The scent of old paper, coffee, and laughter filled the air. The community gym at Lakeside Elementary had been transformed. Strings of paper stars dangled from the ceiling. Folding tables sagged under the weight of donated books, and colorful hand-drawn signs read, "Take a story. Leave a story." It was chaos in the best possible way. Evelyn stood in the center of it all, clipboard in hand, her hair pinned up loosely, her face glowing with the kind of peace she hadn't felt in years. She moved through the crowd like sunlight, checking on volunteers, hugging students, laughing when one of the kids insisted on buying a book with 5 pennies and a button. "Tell you what," she said with a wink, "I'll take the button as a collector's item." The boy grinned, clutching his paperback copy of Charlotte's Web. Nearby, her colleague Tom, the school's art teacher, helped set up a display of children's books. He was kind, easygoing, with the kind of warmth that came naturally to people who had nothing to prove. "Remind me again," Tom said, teasing, "how you convinced the whole neighborhood to donate an entire library's worth of books bribery." She replied, "I promised free cookies." He chuckled. "Well, whatever you're doing, it's working. You've got half the city here." Evelyn smiled, scanning the crowd: parents, students, old friends. The sound of music from a borrowed speaker mixed with the hum of voices. It felt alive. This was the world she belonged to, messy, real, full of heart. She didn't notice him at first. Daniel had been standing near the entrance for almost a full minute before she turned and saw him. He looked different. No suit, no polished armor, just jeans, a gray sweater, and a look that seemed equal parts awe and hesitation. When their eyes met, the world seemed to shift slightly. The noise faded. The air thinned. "Evelyn," he said softly, stepping closer. Her voice caught in her throat before she managed, "Daniel? What are you doing here?" He held up a box. "I brought some books to donate." She blinked. "From where?" "From me," he said simply. "First editions. Some rare prints. I thought they might help raise money." The words were kind, but the gesture, the sheer weight of it, landed awkwardly. The volunteers nearby had started whispering. Even Tom paused mid-step. Watching, Evelyn forced a polite smile. "That's generous, but we're focusing on community donations, local stories, things kids can actually take home and read." "I understand," Daniel said, his voice calm, but something flickered behind his eyes: pride, maybe, or discomfort. Tom stepped forward, offering his hand. "I'm Tom. I teach art here." Daniel shook it. "Daniel Mercer." Tom's eyes widened slightly. "Wait, that Daniel Mercer?" Evelyn's jaw tightened. "Tom, could you give me a second?" "Of course," he said, sensing the shift. "I'll check the snack table." When he was gone, Evelyn turned back to Daniel. "You shouldn't have come." He met her gaze steadily. "I saw the article. You looked happy. I wanted to see it for myself." She exhaled slowly. "You could have done that from a distance. Maybe, but I didn't want distance anymore." The sincerity in his tone was disarming, but she didn't let it sway her. "Not this time. You don't get to walk into my world whenever you feel like fixing something," she said quietly. "That's not how this works." "I'm not here to fix anything," he said. "I just wanted to help." "Help?" She laughed bitterly. "Daniel, you don't even realize it. You still think every problem can be solved by what you bring to the table. Money, influence, even your presence. You don't see how heavy it feels for everyone else." His expression faltered. "I didn't mean to make you feel small." "But you did," she said. "Not because you wanted to, but because that's how you've learned to exist, by filling every space until there's no air left for anyone else." The words hit him harder than he expected. Around them, children laughed. A volunteer shouted something about missing tape. Music played faintly from the corner, and yet, in that moment, it was just the two of them. "You've changed," he said softly. She smiled sadly. "No. I just stopped letting people make me feel grateful for being in the room." He looked down, exhaling. "I didn't come to control anything. Evelyn, I came because Because you saw me laughing with someone she cut in. His eyes lifted sharply. There it was, the flicker of jealousy he hadn't been able to hide. I saw you with him, he admitted, voice low. And maybe, for a second, you thought you had some claim. She finished for him. You don't, Daniel. You can't keep showing up every time something threatens the story you've written in your head. He flinched, shame creeping into his expression. She took a step closer, her voice steady but gentle now. If you want to prove you've changed, stop trying to own every space you enter. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is to stand back. Her words hung between them, quiet but heavy. For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. The noise of the fair swelled back into focused laughter, the rustle of turning pages, the echo of joy that had nothing to do with him. He looked around, really looked at the faces, the warmth, the community that thrived without wealth or influence. And for the first time, he understood what she meant. He had come here believing he could contribute, but all he'd really done was intrude. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, stripped of pride. You're right. I shouldn't have come like this. I'm sorry. Evelyn nodded, her tone gentler now. I know you mean well. But this, she gestured around the gym. This is mine. You don't need to make it yours to respect it. He took a slow breath, letting her words sink in. I see that now. For the first time since she'd known him, Daniel Mercer looked small, not diminished, but human. He turned to go, then paused, glancing back at her with a faint, genuine smile. You're doing something beautiful here, Evelyn. I hope you know that. Her expression softened. I do. Thank you. He nodded once, then left, not with the heavy air of defeat, but with the quiet dignity of someone finally learning how to let go. As the door swung shut behind him, Evelyn stood still for a moment, breathing in the noise, the laughter, the scent of coffee and paper, and life. Tom reappeared with a grin, holding up a roll of tape. Crisis averted. We've got enough for another round of book towers. Evelyn smiled back, steady again. Good. Let's build something worth keeping. And as she turned to help a group of kids organize the stacks of books, the sunlight streaming through the windows fell across her face, warm, steady, unshaken. The first time Daniel reached out again, it wasn't with flowers or apologies or grand gestures. It was an email, simple, direct, and without pretense. Evelyn, I'm not writing to ask for another chance. I just want to help you build that bookstore you once described the gathering place. No strings, no ownership, just belief. Daniel? She stared at the message for nearly an hour before replying. Help me or buy it for me. His response came minutes later. Neither. Partner with you on your terms? When they finally met, it was at a small cafe near the university neutral ground. Daniel arrived early. Sitting by the window, a notebook open in front of him. He looked less like the billionaire the world adored, and more like the man she had once laughed with over burnt pancakes. Evelyn walked in, her steps cautious but sure. Hi, she said softly. He looked up, relief flickering in his eyes. Hi. They sat in silence for a while, the sound of espresso machines filling the space between them. Finally, she said, I don't want your money. Daniel? I know, he said. That's not what I'm offering. Then what are you offering? He leaned back, folding his hands. You said once that you wanted a place where people could belong, a sanctuary built from words. I want to help you make it real. You don't need me to fund it. You just need someone to walk you through the parts that people like you shouldn't have to learn the hard way. She raised an eyebrow. Like what business plans, permits, leasing contracts, investors who'll try to talk over you because you don't look like you belong in the room. Evelyn tilted her head, studying him. And you're just going to teach me that yes, for free? He smiled faintly. For peace of mind. She hesitated. Peace of mind. That I did one thing right with what I have. His tone wasn't rehearsed or polished, it was raw, almost tired. And something in her chest softened. All right, she said finally. We'll try it. But you have to promise me one thing. Anything. You don't make a single decision without asking me first. No fixing, no buying, no saving. Daniel nodded. Deal. The following weeks blurred into quiet collaboration. They met every few days, sometimes in her classroom after hours, sometimes in coffee shops that smelled of cinnamon and ink. Daniel brought structure, Evelyn brought soul. He taught her how to write a proposal, how to talk to lenders, how to think like someone who believed their dream deserved a seat at the table. When she doubted herself, and she did, often he didn't dismiss it. One evening, while they sat in the school library surrounded by stacks of notes and budget sheets, she sighed and said, "What if it fails? Daniel didn't look up from the spreadsheet. Then you'll start again." You're not afraid of failure. Evelyn, you're afraid of being seen failing? There's a difference. She blinked. That's easy for you to say. He finally met her eyes. You think I've never failed? The only difference between us is that when I do, people rewrite the story to protect me. You have to live with the truth out loud. The honesty of that stopped her. It was the first time he'd acknowledged the imbalance between them, not as something to fix, but something to respect. For the first time since they'd met, she didn't feel like the one catching up. The day of the bank meeting arrived 2 months later. Evelyn wore her best blazer, thrifted but neatly pressed, and carried a folder full of notes, projections, and a detailed plan for the gathering place. Daniel sat beside her in the waiting area, dressed plainly, his demeanor quiet, observant. When the bank officer finally called them in, the man barely glanced up from his computer. "So, Miss Hart," he said, flipping through the proposal. "A bookstore? That's quaint." Evelyn smiled politely. "A community bookstore, with programs for children, local authors, and literacy nights. It's not just retail, it's engagement." The banker nodded absently, skimming the numbers. "You're requesting a small business loan of $50,000? "Yes," she said. He frowned slightly. "You're a teacher. No business ownership history. Limited assets." I'm afraid Daniel spoke before he could finish. "You should read the proposal fully before making that decision." The banker glanced up for the first time. His eyes narrowed slightly. "And you are an advisor," Daniel said. "Unofficially?" The banker leaned back, his tone dripping with condescension. "And what qualifies you to advise?" "Mr. Mercer," Daniel said calmly. The man froze mid-motion. "Daniel Mercer?" Daniel nodded once. "Yes." For a long moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. The banker's posture shifted instantly from dismissive to deferential. "Of course. I didn't realize you were involved. If this venture has your support, it doesn't," Daniel interrupted smoothly. It has my respect, and I'd prefer your evaluation to remain objective. The banker blinked, unsure how to proceed. Oh, of course. I just meant. Daniel leaned forward, his tone measured. Miss Hart deserves the same consideration any capable entrepreneur would receive. She's done the work. All I'm asking is that you treat her like you've read it. Evelyn sat perfectly still, her pulse pounding. He hadn't offered money. He hadn't flexed his influence. He'd simply used his name not to dominate, but to level the ground beneath her feet. The banker cleared his throat. Yes? I see. We'll review the proposal thoroughly. When they walked out, Evelyn exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. You didn't have to do that. I did, he said. That's what people with power should do. Make room for others to be heard. She looked at him, her voice soft. That's the first time you've ever used it right. He smiled faintly. Took me long enough. They stood on the steps outside the bank, the afternoon sun catching in her hair. Evelyn turned to him, a small, genuine smile curving her lips. You know, Daniel, I think this might actually work. It will, he said quietly. Because it's yours. She hesitated, then added, and maybe because you finally learned when to stand beside someone instead of in front of them. He laughed softly. Lesson learned. They walked toward the corner together, neither rushing ahead, their steps steady, side by side. And as they passed a shop window, Evelyn caught their reflection, her steady and certain, him. No longer a man running from himself, but one finally brave enough to stop. For the first time, they looked like equals. 6 months later, Chicago was dressed in early autumn leaves scattered like forgotten confetti, the air cool enough to carry the scent of roasted coffee and possibility. The soft glow from the corner windows of the Hearth and Quill Cafe spilled out onto the street like a welcome inside. The small bookstore cafe buzzed with warmth music playing gently from an old record player, the scent of cinnamon and ink lingering in the air. Books lined the walls in uneven rows, a mix of new titles and beloved secondhand stories. Local art hung between the shelves, and a small sign by the counter read, handwritten in Evelyn's looping script, a story shared is a light that never fades. The crowd was modest teachers, students, neighbors, volunteers, but every face carried something priceless pride. Evelyn moved through the space like someone still half in disbelief. She'd imagined this moment for years in notebooks, in quiet nights after grading papers, but the real thing felt bigger, warmer. Children giggled near the reading corner. Old friends sipped coffee at mismatched tables, and the sound of laughter mingled with soft jazz. Miss Hart, a young girl called, waving a book in the air. You have your own store now. Evelyn laughed, crouching to meet her eyes. It's our store, sweetie. You'll always have a chair here, across the room. Daniel stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, apron askew, pretending to understand how the espresso machine worked. He looked impossibly like he belonged there when she caught his eye. He lifted a cup toward her in a mock toast. She smiled, shaking her head. You're going to break that thing. I've already broken 3, he admitted, voice low, teasing. But the 4th time's the charm. You're supposed to be mingling, she said. I am, he said with a grin. Just with caffeine. They both laughed, the kind of laughter that came from having walked through fire together and found air again on the other side. A local band began to play a soft acoustic set that filled the cafe with a heartbeat of its own. The chatter faded as the music took over. Evelyn leaned against the counter, letting the sound wash over her. "Do you realize what you've done?" Daniel asked quietly, stepping beside her. She looked around the kids reading in the corner, the teachers talking with parents, the shelves filled with donated stories and shared dreams. "I guess I do," she said softly. "I just never thought I'd live long enough to see it." He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable but warm. "You built something rare, Evelyn. Something the world forgot how to value." She turned to him with a faint smile. "You sound like you're making a toast." He chuckled. "Maybe I am." They stood in silence for a moment, letting the hum of conversation and clinking cups fill the quiet between them. Then, as if summoned by memory, a voice cut through the music. "Well, I'll be damned." Evelyn froze. Lucas Gray stood in the doorway, thinner, paler, his once perfect posture dulled by weariness. His suit was sharp, but his eyes were tired. For a moment, time stilled. Conversations faltered, glances turned. He gave a small, incredulous laugh. "So this is what you've been up to." Evelyn's heart hammered, but her voice stayed calm. "Lucas." He looked around, taking in the cozy chaos of the place. "It's charming. Didn't think you had it in you." The words were meant to sting, but they didn't. Not anymore. Evelyn straightened, her voice quiet but firm. "That's because you never really looked." Daniel stepped forward slightly, protective, but silent. He didn't need to say anything. His presence was enough. Lucas's gaze flicked to him, recognition dawning. Of course. The billionaire, the mystery man, you two actually made it work, huh? Evelyn smiled, not smug, not defensive, just steady. "We made this work. That's all that matters." Lucas scoffed, glancing around one last time. "It won't last. Places like this never do." Evelyn tilted her head slightly, her tone soft but sure. "Maybe not. But it's here now. And that's more than I can say for what we had." The quiet strength in her words silenced him. Lucas hesitated, then gave a small, uncertain nod, a ghost of humility, before turning and walking out. The door closed behind him, the bell above it ringing once, clear and final. Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Daniel watched her, admiration in his eyes. "You didn't need me to say a word. I didn't need anyone to—" She smiled faintly. "I think that's the point." As the night wore on, the crowd thinned, the music faded, the lights dimmed, and the hum of the espresso machine slowed to silence. Evelyn wiped down the counter while Daniel stacked books in the corner. The warmth between them wasn't charged or uncertain anymore. It was steady, comfortable, alive. When the last guest left, she sank into a chair by the window, exhausted and glowing. Daniel joined her, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. They sat quietly, looking out at the street, the reflection of the cafe's golden light stretching across the glass. "I keep thinking it's a dream," she said softly. "It isn't," he replied. "Dreams don't smell like espresso and floor polish." She laughed, the sound soft and full. "Do you remember what you said the night we met at the gala? That we were fine?" She smiled. "Yeah. You were right. We were." For a long time, they didn't speak. The silence wasn't the kind that weighed, it was the kind that healed. Finally, she turned to him, her voice tender. "Thank you, Daniel, for everything." He looked at her, eyes warm with something like reverence. "No," he said quietly. "You built this, Evelyn." I just held the flashlight. Her throat tightened, emotion blooming behind her ribs. "For once." She didn't try to hide it. Outside. The street lights flickered. Inside. The Hearth and Quill Cafe glowed softly, a beacon of stories. Second chances. And quiet courage. Evelyn reached across the table, resting her hand lightly over his. He didn't move. Didn't speak. They didn't need to. The world had finally gone still enough for both of them to simply be. 1 year later, the city breathed in shades of amber and gold. Leaves clung stubbornly to the branches lining Michigan Avenue, and the air carried the faint scent of rain and wood smoke. Evelyn Hart walked beside Daniel Mercer. Through the quiet lobby of the Silvermont Hotel, the same marble floors, the same grand chandelier, yet everything felt different. The last time she had been here, she'd worn a borrowed dress and a heart full of panic. Tonight, she wore confidence like silk. Her arm brushed his as they crossed the hall, laughter echoing faintly from a distant ballroom where another gala was underway. The sound didn't sting anymore. It was just part of the city's rhythm. Daniel pressed the elevator button and smiled softly. "You sure you want to do this here?" Evelyn looked up at him, her eyes bright. "You said it yourself we should end our story where it began." "End?" He chuckled quietly. "I was hoping for the next chapter." The elevator doors opened to the rooftop terrace, a hidden garden perched above the city, closed to the public after hours. But Daniel, with his quiet influence and careful charm, had managed to reserve it privately. It was breathtaking. String lights swayed gently above them, their glow soft against the twilight. Planters of autumn chrysanthemums lined the stone path, and beyond the edge, the skyline stretched endlessly, all steel, glass, and golden windows against a navy blue sky. Evelyn stood by the railing, gazing out at the city that had broken her, rebuilt her, and finally embraced her. "Do you remember that night?" she asked softly. Daniel stepped beside her. "How could I forget? You must have thought I was insane," she said with a small laugh. Marching up to a stranger and kissing him, he smiled. Best blind introduction in history. She rolled her eyes, but the laugh that followed was light, genuine. "I thought I'd ruined my life that night." "You started it," he corrected. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything they'd survived, every choice that had led them here. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't kneel immediately. He just held it, turning it once between his fingers, as if weighing its meaning. "Do you know what I used to believe?" he asked. Voice quiet. That control was the only way to keep from being hurt. That if I stayed above it all, the chaos, the people, the mess, I could never lose. He glanced at her, a faint smile ghosting his lips. "Then you crashed into me like a storm I didn't see coming." Evelyn's breath caught, her eyes glimmering. "I've built companies." "Evelyn," he continued, "signed deals worth more than some countries' budgets. But nothing I've ever built means as much as what we built together, a place for people to belong, a place for stories to live." He finally went down on one knee. The world seemed to go quiet, the hum of the city below, fading until there was only the sound of her heartbeat. He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold band, adorned with a single, small sapphire the color of dusk. Not extravagant, not loud, just perfect. Daniel looked up at her, his voice steady but trembling at the edges. "You kissed a stranger once to escape your past." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, a soft smile curving her lips as she whispered, "And found the man who helped me build my future." The words hung in the cold air like a vow. Daniel exhaled shakily, emotion tightening his throat. Evelyn Hart, you are the only story I'll never stop wanting to read. Will you marry me for a moment? She couldn't speak. The city lights blurred behind her tears. Chicago itself seemed to shimmer. Then she nodded, the movement small but certain. Yes, she breathed 1,000 times. Yes. He stood, slipping the ring onto her finger. It fit, like it had been waiting for her all along. She reached for him. And when their lips met, it wasn't desperate or uncertain like that first chaotic night. It was steady, reverent, the kind of kiss that comes after knowing someone's soul. Later, they sat together on the stone bench near the edge of the terrace. The city stretched beneath them, car lights tracing slow lines through the streets. A quiet pulse of life moving on. Evelyn leaned her head against his shoulder. Do you ever think about how strange it all was? Strange that it started with a mistake? He smiled. I don't think it was a mistake. She tilted her head to look at him. What would you call it then? Fate, he said simply. Or maybe just really bad timing that turned out perfect. She laughed softly. You and your poetic logic. It's your fault, he teased. You infected me with literature. They fell into a comfortable silence again. The kind that only two people who've lived through storms together could share. Below them, the ballroom lights glimmered faintly through the glass roof. Somewhere down there, another woman might be standing alone in a too fancy dress, clutching her glass and wondering if she belonged. Evelyn hoped she'd find her courage too, because the truth was, belonging wasn't something granted by invitation, it was something built, one brave choice at a time. Daniel traced his thumb gently over the back of her hand. Do you miss teaching? I still teach, she said, smiling. Only now my classroom smells like coffee. He laughed softly. And your students come with lattes. She nodded. And stories. The wind picked up, carrying the faint hum of traffic below. Evelyn looked out over the city one last time, her heart full not of longing, but of peace. She thought of everything that had brought her here, the heartbreak, the fear, the humiliation, the desperate kiss that had started it all. Every wrong turn had been necessary. Every scar had pointed her home. She turned to Daniel, her voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes, she said, running from heartbreak leads you straight into home. Daniel looked at her with quiet wonder. Then I'm glad you ran straight into me. He pulled her close, and together they stood at the edge of the rooftop, the city glittering beneath them, vast, imperfect, and endlessly alive. The lights of Chicago flickered like 1,000 unwritten stories, and among them, two people once strangers. Now each other's home began the next one. Sometimes the choices that feel like mistakes are the ones that lead us exactly where we need to be. Evelyn's story reminds us that dignity isn't found in wealth, titles, or perfection. It's found in how we rise after being broken, how we choose honesty over pride, and how we open our hearts again even when it hurts. Daniel's journey teaches us something just as profound, that love isn't about rescuing or owning someone. It's about standing beside them, believing in them, and using whatever power we have to lift them higher, not to keep them small. For anyone who's ever been underestimated, left behind, or made to feel less than, this story whispers a quiet truth: you are enough right now, as you are. You don't need to be richer, louder, or braver to deserve kindness or love. And for those who've spent years protecting themselves from pain, it's a reminder that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the doorway to real connection. Because sometimes, life's most beautiful chapters begin when we stop running and let ourselves be found. Thank you so much for spending your time with Shining Stories tonight. If Evelyn and Daniel's journey touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own moments of courage, forgiveness, or second chances, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that warm the soul and remind us all of what truly matters: love, dignity, and hope. Stay tuned for more heartfelt stories every week, because sometimes one story can change the way we see the world.